Hi everyone and welcome back to the Unique Perspective Show on YouTube. On this week's episode, we got to sit down with a person who I am very good friends with for many years. We went to camp together, and as you'll hear in this week's episode. His name is David Beiss. He has a rare disease, as you will hear more about it in this week's episode. This week's episode is in memory of my dear friend, Raphy Strauss, Raphael, Yaakov, Yisroel Ben Ron. It is also being sponsored by VentureTech Computer Repair. For all your computer repair, IT setup, etc., please visit us at www.venturetechcomputers.com. Email us at info@venturetechcomputers.com or call us at 347-603-0033. That is 347-603-0033. It is also being sponsored by the Monsey Mavasser. The Monsey Mavasser is a weekly Jewish newspaper that goes out to the entire tri-state area, whether it be Monsey, Passaic, New Jersey, Brooklyn, or anywhere else. The Monsey Mavasser is there for you. If you would like to learn more about what the Monsey Mavasser newspaper is, please visit them at www.monseymavasser.com. That is www.monseymavasser.com. Thanks and enjoy this week's episode with David Beiss. Welcome to the Unique Perspective Show. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Been a long time in the making. I've been thinking about having you on my show for a really long time. I just never really, we haven't seen each other in about, 15 years. So it's very, it was hard to get you, but we got you.
Yeah, it's definitely been a while. Hopefully this is the start of it not being such a long time between, seeing and getting together.
Exactly. So, first of all, where are you right now?
Yeah, so currently I'm in the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I'm currently working from home. Didn't go into the office today. I work in Brooklyn. Yeah, I'm a lawyer. So yeah, that's where I'm at, going out right now.
Okay, so growing up, first of all, where did you grow up? And second of all, what schools did you go to? And
Sure.
tell us a little bit about your childhood.
Yeah, so so I was born in Queens. My parents, one of my dad's from Montreal. My mom also grew up in Queens. But most of my childhood, I grew up in West Hempstead, which is Long Island. I grew up. I lived there basically all my life until I went to college and whatnot, which is great. I went to Hank Hebrew Academy of Nassau County from like pre-K up until 12th grade, which is a great experience. And yeah, I mean, thank God from Hank and from West Hempstead, I really, thank God had a lot of still have a lot of close friends, and it was really a great experience. From Hank, I went to Torah Shraga in Israel for the year to learn, actually for a year and a half to learn in Israel, which was in Jerusalem. After that, I went to YU for about 3 semesters, transferred to Baruch, graduated from Baruch with a degree in public affairs.
Wow.
And then I went to law school. Where I moved to DC to go to the George Washington University Law School in DC, and graduated in 2020, and I've been working ever since. So it's been a little bit of a ride, but thank God it's been good.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I actually remember coming to your house once, I think, for like a
Yeah.
Super Bowl party.
Yeah.
But growing up, so if you can explain to us, to our audience, what you exactly have as like
Sure.
as your condition, that would be great.
Yeah. So I was born with a very, very rare collection of skin diseases called epidermolysis bullosa, which is EB for short.
Okay.
Um, and basically, what it does is it causes blistering on the surface of the skin, or really the
Wow.
skin to shear off from any contact or friction, right? So that can be something as simple as using a pen or a pencil to write, typing on a keyboard, um, but really goes all the way to just walking around or sitting on a chair, things like that, right? Because everything that you do in life has friction, right? And really,
Right.
the two most areas where you have friction on your body every day, your hands and your feet.
Right.
So for me, growing up, walking was always a challenge because as soft as your socks and your shoes are, there's always going to be friction. So 90% of the blisters that I have are on my feet and my hands. So growing up, I used a wheelchair mostly to get around. As I got older, I started, yes, using the wheelchair less and less.
Okay.
But EB is something that has really, I would say, shaped my life, and and is something that I think I've learned a lot from, taken a lot from, and especially when you put it in perspective, most people, or I would say a lot of people with EB, actually pass away at a young age.
Okay.
So there are different levels of severity for EB. I happen to have one of the least severe forms of EB, even
Okay.
though I'm still affected on a day-to-day basis. But there are people that have EB that unfortunately die before the age of a few years old, 5 years old,
Wow.
for a variety of reasons. So it's definitely something that I've learned to live with, and have, and I think have also gained from. But it's been a challenge for sure.
Wow. So growing up, when you were
Yeah.
when this first of all, when were you diagnosed, and how was the school experience with you being in school with having EB?
Yeah. So I was diagnosed around like 3 or 4 days old.
Oh wow. Okay.
And it's actually an interesting story. So it's a genetic condition, but
Okay.
in my case, there's no family history of it whatsoever on any side. So it was a gene mutation.
Wow.
And after I was born, everything looked fine and dandy. And then like a day or two after my parents had brought me home, they saw like my skin was all like red and splotchy, so they brought me back to the hospital. And it's interesting, no one knew what it was, because especially at that point in the early 90s, it
Right.
really wasn't taught in the medical schools. People didn't have exposure to what EB was. It's a really rare orphan disease that affects, it's 1 in 1 million live births.
Wow.
So it's very, very rare. Um, and there's this old doctor who said, "Oh, I think it may be this. I think I saw it like 40 years ago." So thank God for him, and he was the one that was like, put my parents on the right track. About getting diagnosed, and obviously that was a shock to them. But I think they kind of made the decision. Just to segue into your question about school, I think that at that point they kind of made the decision that they weren't going to kind of let it take over my life. They were kind of going to let me decide how EB affected my life.
Okay.
So um, early in my life, I did split time in like pre-K. I split time between a school called Henry Viscardi, which was for kids with like disabilities of all sorts, and Hank, which was a completely normal school. But then again, they soon realized that, it was just best for me to be in a school with, the people that were in West Hempstead, they were my neighborhood that I was friends with, and whatnot. And, so being in a school where I was the only one, that used a wheelchair that had a very visible disability, it definitely was challenging at a young age. Um, because I think like all children are, we're very susceptible to thinking like, why am I different? Why, is this happening to me? Why are all my friends playing basketball or hockey and I can't? Those types of things. So it definitely took me. It was definitely, I would say, a difficult experience kind of coming to terms with EB at a young age,
Right.
especially in the context of school where, I was with everyone that was normal. And it wasn't like people weren't friends with me because of EB or anything like that. It just, I had to recognize that there were certain differences and, things that they could do that I couldn't. And, it definitely took me a while to kind of come to terms with that and figure out how to adapt, I would say.
Was it easy, or was it harder to make friends because of it, or was it easier to make friends because of it?
I would say that, there were times when it was harder because, people are sometimes a little bit hesitant
Right.
or, unsure, how to, how to approach or have a discussion with, especially as a child, right? Like how to
100%.
have a discussion or approach someone that's different than them, whether it's a wheelchair or whatnot. But on the flip side, there were a lot of people that were like, oh wow, he, has a cool wheelchair and, he's, very normal. It's the only thing that I can say it's different. So I wouldn't say it was like really that hard. And especially considering, the people that I went to elementary school with, a lot of them were people that were from my neighborhood. So I was seeing them in
Right.
shul. Our parents were friends. So it was, our friendship was more than just, oh, he has EB, let's be friends with him. It was, we were actually good friends, and we would hang out all the time. And I think, they did recognize at some point, like, oh, David can't necessarily do everything, or, there are certain things that we have to be cognizant of, so I give my credit to, friends just like, my family before them, for realizing that, you know, there were certain things that, that were challenges, I guess.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, okay. So that was growing up in Hink and your childhood. How
Yeah.
how did, I mean, you were you hospitalized a lot because of it, and how did you get involved with / Camp Simcha?
Yeah. So to my recollection, I really wasn't ever hospitalized or anything
Okay.
like that. With the form of EB that I have, it's kind of interesting because it's not so severe where you're constantly having surgeries or being hospitalized again, unless I know that there are people that have similar types to me that get infections and need to be hospitalized for that type of stuff. But that, at least for me, wasn't the norm. But on the flip side, it was affecting me every minute of every day,
Right.
whether through pain or through, so it was kind of um it's kind of an interesting dynamic in that end, in that sense. um but I think that, as I mentioned before, there were certain things that going to a school and having friends that were all, you know, quote unquote, fully abled, right? They were all going to summer camps or doing activities that were, that they were completely normal. They were able to do play sports all
Right.
day, things like that. That wasn't real again, which again I would have loved to have done, but it wasn't really what was in the cards, right? So I think
Right.
that's when, um, I think it was around second or third grade where I guess, again, I'm not exactly sure how it came to be. Either my parents reached out to High Lifeline, or there was some sort of connection there, and we started getting involved. And I think it was the second year of Camp Simple Special where,
Right.
I went, and which was obviously a great experience, and allowed me to be with people who didn't really care about the disability, and also I was able to really have a full summer experience.
Right. And just to piggyback on that, I think it was the second summer that you and our friend Ellie Portel came,
Yep.
and we were pretty much in the same bunk for like 6 summers in a row, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Yeah, it was something like that, 6, 7 summers in a row, which, again, it's great. I got to meet you, got to meet Ellie. Some great times of like
Yeah,
growing up,
we had great times actually. But
Yeah.
so
And I'll also
after
say, but yeah, I was
yeah
going to also say about with Camp Simcha, I think it was also really interesting, just because, you look at the three of us and we're all different. We all have different disabilities, and we all,
right
um, came from very different backgrounds. And I think it was like very interesting how, even till this day, even though, it's been a while since, we've been in the same room and
right
really, been together. I think it's still interesting how we're all still in contact to some extent 15 years later, just from that relationship, and which I think is great.
yeah that I actually do think that's great. I mean, 15 years later, I mean we're still in touch to some degree. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So after that, you went to Israel for a year and a half. All this. How was it living in Israel in yeshiva in school?
So after high school, I went to so going to yeshiva, and I would say actually picking a yeshiva was difficult. And I
Okay,
actually credit Ellie. So it's funny because I actually followed. Ellie was a year older than me,
right.
right? And so a lot of the stuff I actually piggybacked on Ellie.
Okay,
Our families were in touch. For example, when I think it was between the 10th and 11th grade, in my community, a lot of people go to Israel on a summer program to like travel through Israel for the year.
okay.
Most of them have a lot of hikes and stuff like that, which obviously for someone
You
who uses a wheelchair
right,
is not ideal. So
right.
Ellie was actually the first, was the first one I knew that did a program called Yad B'Yad, which
Okay,
was for people which combined people with fully abled and people with mental disabilities, and physical disabilities on a trip to Israel.
oh
So
wow.
I so so it's funny because I piggybacked on him. After he did the program his year, I
Okay,
did it the next year, and then when he was going to Israel, he also had the same problems that I did the year after, where Israel, for all its greatness, isn't the most accessible country in the world,
100%. Right.
for wheelchairs and things like that. Um, a lot of it just having to do with the historical nature of Israel and geography,
Yeah.
right, and whatnot. So I know Ellie struggled, I believe, when finding a yeshiva that was going to be a good fit, for him
Right.
personally, but
Okay.
also that would be able to have a wheelchair. So I similarly had that problem where it really came down to two yeshivas that were wheelchair accessible. One was Torah Traga, which I ended up going to
Okay.
in Beit Vegan in Jerusalem, and the other, I'm blanking on its name, but Ellie went there. So just getting to the yeshiva was or I would say picking yeshiva was interesting because a lot of other people had options, right? They could
Right.
choose this yeshiva, that yeshiva to really fit their need. Um, where I was kind of pigeonholed just because there were two yeshivas that were like accessible at the time. That being said, I loved my experience. I, have great friends from there. I had a great experience. But it was also a challenge because, you know, also, like I said, Israel isn't the most accessible. So my wheelchair would constantly break. Like, I think it broke like, I don't know, like every other week. And it was
Wow.
just like crazy just because of like the cobblestone and whatnot. But being in Israel was great. I have a lot of family in Israel. I actually started my foundation in Israel. And I, got to, learn for a bit, and just make some great friends. So going to yeshiva there was an incredible experience, though obviously a difficult one as well. Like I said, just because a lot of people when they travel through Israel, it's hikes, it's things like that, which make it difficult for someone who uses a wheelchair, or even then I was kind of slowly starting to gravitate away towards using a wheelchair every day, but even with EB, if I can walk one day, I know that the next day it's going to be really painful just because of the blisters from the day before, and I won't be able to walk for a day or two after. So it was
Wow.
definitely a challenge. I definitely learned a lot about myself and about how to deal with EB, as I was becoming an adult. So it was interesting.
Wow. Wow. So you actually brought it up, and I wanted to bring it up as well. You started an organization.
Yes.
If you can tell us a little bit about what the organization's name is and what the organization stands for and what it does.
Sure. Yeah. So since Sky Lifeline, once I got involved with Sky Lifeline, I really kind of loved the nonprofit scene, and I really
Okay.
liked the message that Sky Lifeline was doing. So I started fundraising with them, and then after my Israel trip with Yaakov and Yabiyad, I actually started a fundraising team for them. But then once I graduated high school, I really wanted to do something for EB that was very personal to me.
Okay.
And when I started looking at it, I realized that a lot of the fundraising does two things. It's one geared towards older people, right,
Okay.
who have more money to donate, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what a foundation is. It really needs to take in money to do whatever their cause is. And two, all the EB organizations um, that were around at the time were really focused more on research for a
Okay.
cure, for a treatment. Because at the moment, there is no cure or treatment for any version of EB.
Wow.
Thank God, over the past 10, 15, 20 years, they've made significant progress. But when I was starting this in about 2011, there really, again, we were really at the beginning stages. So I wanted to do two things. I wanted to create something for EB that focused
Okay.
on EB, that didn't just focus on medical research. I wanted something to help people with EB, right? Because people that have severe forms of EB, their families can be spending between $10,000 and $20,000 a month just on wound care supplies, which is
Wow.
an astronomical amount. Not all of it necessarily covered by insurance, things like that. And to me, when I tell someone about EB, most of them have no idea what it's about, right? And for them, unless you have a personal connection to EB, to say, oh, hey, you're going to give money, and maybe 10, 20, 15, 50 years down the road, we might get a cure, is very hard for people to wrap their heads around if they don't have a real connection to it, right?
A
So
hundred
I
percent.
wanted so I wanted to split whatever money we brought in, half to go towards the research, which is obviously extremely important, so we can find a cure, but also half to go to support families that have they're dealing with the effects of EB. So it's easier for people who have never heard of it to like understand, what are we practically doing right now? How are we making a difference? And the
Okay.
second thing or the third thing I wanted to accomplish with my organization was, like I said, almost all organizations focus on people who are older, have money, that can give large amounts of money. I wanted to focus on high school, college, and young professionals who, are just starting out. So they may not have a significant amount of money to give, but the goal is get them acclimated with the cause now, teach them about what it means, what EB is, or any other organization, or the other cause really, and let them grow into it. So when, 5, 10 years down the road, when they do have money, to give, then they really feel a connection, to give that big investment.
Wow.
Um, and so that was something that was really important to me, and that's how I started. Was called Team Butterfly, which is a running organization,
Okay.
an organization that mainly we focused on doing running events, marathons, 5Ks, color runs, things like that, where people would run, raise money, and support the cause. And my first year, I thought, I was like, hey, so I would just say this is that I partnered with a big EB organization, um, to get off the ground. And as I was explaining to this, I was telling them, I think I'd be ecstatic if we get 15 people to run. I'm sure I can get
Okay.
15 of my friends to do it. And the first year, actually, when we ran the Jerusalem Marathon, I think in 2012, we ended up having 50 people, right?
Wow.
And raising about $75,000, right? And like, it just blew me away that people were invested in this, right? And I went from yeshiva to seminary,
Right.
recruiting and speaking, and doing that. And it was just really inspiring to see that people cared about, this no name disease that they'd never heard of. And were inspired to get involved and make a difference. So, and
Wow.
thank God from then we then grew and grew and grew, to raise quite a bit of money and help out the community. So,
and is still running today, or you're or
Yeah,
you're
so
or it took a back seat.
it definitely took a back seat, during law school. I did do a few events for it during law school.
Huh?
As I graduated and started working, it obviously becomes a little bit difficult. But definitely, my plan is to keep it going. We've had a little bit of a lull, just because a lot of things with a rare disease really have to be run by people who are intimately involved.
Right.
And so like me taking a front, being in the driver's seat for that is very important. But we hope to definitely start doing some events around New York, and whatnot, hopefully soon.
So wow, so that's amazing. So you
Yeah.
came back from Israel, and you went to YU, or where did you go from Israel?
Yeah, so after a year and a half in Israel, I went to YU, excuse me, thinking that I was gonna become a doctor. I was doing
Okay.
pre-med, and turns out that wasn't for me. And so I was there for 3 semesters, in YU. Again, like met great people, had a great experience. I just realized that medicine wasn't for me. I wanted to pivot. That was really when I was really getting into the nitty gritty of fundraising, of um, nonprofit work, and also the political scene. So I kind of made a pivot that instead of uh, going to med school, I wanted to do policy and or nonprofit or law, and I ended up deciding that transferring to Baruch, getting a degree in public affairs, and then going to law school would be the best route for me. So
Wow. Did you have you knew anyone in law, meaning in the law industry, that you were able to piggyback on by picking a college or something, and then deciding on a major in law?
so I would say that I had there were definitely people in the community that I spoke to, or people that I knew, and kind of got advice from, regarding what what the best direction was. Right, because at a point I was, well, should I go to law school or should I get like a master's in like public affairs or whatever the case
Right.
is,
Okay.
international affairs, and it's so one of my mentors in Baruch, I was a professor of mine, great guy. His name is Marco De Sena. I think in the span of 2 years, I took like 3 or 4 classes with him, and it was very interesting. We were very close, and one day we were having a discussion about like what I should do after I graduate, and he's like, "David, I want you to come back tomorrow, do some research, find people who you would love to have their job, right? Like, bring me a list of 5 or 10 people who you would love to have their job. That would be your end goal."
Okay.
And I went home that night and I thought about it. I did research and I came back to him, and we were once he had the list. He's like, "What do all these people have in common?" And they all had law degrees,
Oh
right?
wow.
And a lot of them, at practice law or in politics or in national security or whatnot. And it was like, it shouldn't be such a unique way of thinking. Like, oh, just like find someone who you really want to have their job and follow their career trajectory. But to me, at least, it was like a novel thing, and really helped me out a lot. And that kind of like solidified my decision. Like, hey, I'm going to take the LSAT, go to law school, and whatnot. Because ultimately, and this is still my goal. Politics is something I'm very interested in, very passionate about. Um, I actually worked for one of the top political consulting firms here in New York City,
Oh wow.
for a while, and it was a great experience. And that's why I wanted to be. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to be in DC, aside from the fact that GW is a very good school. So I always kind of had that in my head: go to law school, practice a bit, and hopefully get into politics. And I ended up actually in law school. I concentrated in national security and international law. So that was
Wow.
interesting. Yeah.
So in law school, how was it hard living away from in New York? West Hempstead, was it hard for you to live away in Washington? Like you were dorming, or I don't know what you were doing, how you were living there. But was it
Yeah,
hard for you?
it definitely was an adjustment. I will say that. So, um, when I started law school in 2017,
Right.
my family actually, like the year or two before, I decided that they were going to make Aliyah.
Okay.
So, um, my parents, all my siblings were moving to Israel. So it was
Wow.
interesting. Like, so, you know, obviously I was not going to be in New York anyway because I had decided that I was going to go to school in DC. But they also made a decision that they're going to make Aliyah,
Okay.
and that we actually the same exact summer within like the week. I went to DC. They all left to Israel, sold the
Wow.
house and whatnot. So it was definitely interesting because it was definitely an adjustment having lived in Manhattan the years prior to that, really having to, I didn't go knowing anyone,
Right.
having any friends there. I had like some friends of friends that I was in contact with, went down to visit and all that. But, definitely in the school, I knew no one. Um, and, and in the Jewish community, there's a small
Right.
Jewish young professional community. So, thank God I was able to find, a roommate, and get an apartment there. But it definitely took a bit of um, a bit of time to acclimate myself to law school, because law school is very different than any type of school you go to.
Right.
But then also just the community and being in DC itself. Thank God I was able to, uh, during law school and in that first year, go to Israel to visit family, during my breaks and for some of the Chagim. I would always come back to my grandparents' house for like, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. But it was definitely a process, getting used to everything there,
Right.
and I'll say, one of the big things there also is that, you're in New York, you're used to having a lot of kosher food and there are Jews everywhere, so first of all, in DC proper, when I was there was like two kosher restaurants. Actually, there might
Okay.
have been only one at the time. Um, so that's something that you have to get used to. And there's no like in DC proper, a kosher supermarket. You have to go 30, 40 minutes outside of DC to get to a kosher supermarket.
Right.
Um, so that was definitely took a little bit of time, to get used to. But again, it was a really cool, good experience. And I'll say one of the other things that was took time getting used to is, so I was in a class of about, I think, 400 people. So GW is one of the
Wow.
biggest law schools in the country, one of, and we, again, there were about 400 people in our class. And I was the only one in the entire school that wore a kippah.
Wow.
I actually then found,
Beautiful.
like, my first week, there was actually one professor that wore a kippah. I actually had my second semester. But again, that was something that took a while to get used to, being the only really visible Jew. Obviously, there were a lot of Jewish people in the school, but someone who wore a kippah, very interesting. So,
Wow.
yeah.
So, so you finished law school
Yep.
in what year?
So it was in the middle of the pandemic. I graduated in May of 2020.
Oh wow. So right in the beginning of the pandemic, you graduated.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Was that also difficult because you graduated like in the heart of the pandemic?
Yeah, it definitely was for a number of reasons. So the pandemic, in America, or like most of the world, really started in like the end of February, beginning of March in 2020.
Right.
So the last 2 years of law school, the second and third year of law school, I was actually involved in a Israel program. Where we would, bring non-Jewish students to Israel for spring break and tour and
Okay.
all that. And which is a great experience. Uh, I can talk about that for hours.
Okay.
And um, so right when the pandemic started, we were in Israel. We were all coming back, and I think, if I remember correctly, between the day that, we got back from spring break, we had one day of class, and then basically everything was canceled right after that.
Wow.
So it was difficult in the sense of, graduating law school where the entire last half of my last semester was all online. No one had any idea what they were doing because, like, online, Zooms wasn't really much of a thing, at that point. And also it was very difficult just because, a lot of people who I'd grown close to or become friends with throughout 3 years of law school, right? We were in spring break, and then right after that, basically no one saw each other again, right? So between not seeing all the people that I had spent years studying with and getting to know, and then kind of just graduating with a thud, it was kind of sad for us,
Yeah.
so it was difficult, but at the end of the day, we graduated, we did it, and here we are working. So
Wow. So just a couple more questions.
Sure.
Are you still like in contact with, besides Eli Portel, are you still in contact with anyone other than him from Chalef and Kem Simcha or Kids of Courage? Are you still involved with any of them? Or are you in contact with them?
Yeah, so I definitely am with some people. Again, I wouldn't say necessarily daily contact. And I'll also say with Kids of Courage, so I was, after Chai Lifeline, I believe I was a camper on Kids of Courage for 1 year. And then I actually became a staff member and then head staff at Kids of Courage. Right before, I think my last year, it was the summer before, or the summer of, that I went to law school, which was actually convenient because they were going to DC for the trip. And then I was just there, so it was great. But I definitely am, still in contact with, former counselors, some people who were campers, things like that. It's obviously a really big part of my life, definitely a big part of my childhood, and I still consider it a big part of my life, even though I, aren't really involved with either organization at this point, that much. You know, it really, I think, kind of helped kind of form my perspective on, life to an extent, on EB, and so I'm really grateful to to like what those organizations gave me, and I think a lot of that has to do with the staff members, the counselors, that are at those organizations and that are making a difference for the kids, like like you and me, and I'm sure you have similar experiences, where had we not had that, I think one of the big things that I got out of Camp Simcha Special, High Lifeline, Kids of Courage was, I think before you go to a camp or a program like that, when you have a disability, it's really kind of like a me versus the world thing where, you're the only one that's different. I, either look different, feel different, talk different, whatever it is, and, whether how people deal with that around you is very different. And I think I can tell you from personal experience, I don't think I was really comfortable in my own skin really until Camp Simcha and Kids of Courage, where I was kind of able to kind of like see other people around me and have people accept me for who I was, disability and all, and that kind of helped me break the mold, I think,
100%,
and realize that, oh yeah, you have EB, but that shouldn't stop you from being a normal person, from doing what you want and things like that. Excuse me. And I would say I credit Camp Simcha and Chai Lifeline really for giving me that perspective. And one thing I'll just mention is that when I first started my organization, Team Butterfly, the first year I actually ran the 10K. Right, everyone was running to raise money for my organization, and I was like, in years prior when I would do these marathons, maybe I would have like a former counselor or someone push me in a wheelchair, and I'd run across the finish line, right, like the last 200 feet, and I think one year I did the last mile barely, and I was like, and it was just funny to me how people, like all the runners, and these marathons of thousands of people, all come over to me, pat me on the back, like, you're doing great. I'm just like sitting there in a wheelchair, like, I'm not doing anything, like,
Yeah.
and when I started my organization, I was like, I think this is a time to like hopefully inspire people and like make a difference, but also challenge myself to do the run myself, and to the best of my ability, and I really credit it to Camp Simcha, Chai Lifeline, and all those people involved who kind of gave me that attitude of, I'm not going to be different, and I am going to try and do the impossible, essentially, and thank God I was, I did the 10K, small little secret. I didn't do the whole thing.
Okay.
So I actually had a group of like, I don't know, 10 of my friends who were running with me. And, at various times during the run,
you hopped in that wheelchair.
I would actually say I hopped on them, they'd like give me a piggyback ride on their shoulders. So, again, it was like a really fun experience, but even just that was just, was obviously very difficult, and I couldn't walk for like 2 weeks after. But really all of that, I really think, stems from those experiences at Camp Simcha, the Courage, High Lifeline, and whatnot.
Wow.
And like I said, like, the people, the counselors there, I think, were super, super important, just of how they handled themselves, and the attitude that they had, with us. And like I said, thankfully I'm in touch with, a bunch of them today. Which is, again, crazy to think. My first counselor ever. I don't know if you remember Ari Pelkovitz.
Yeah, of course. He lives in the city, doesn't he?
Yeah, he lives in the city. I see him from time to time, and
I think he has 2 or 3 kids now.
Yep, he does. And it's just so funny because I met him when I was like 7 years old, or whatever it was, and he was my first counselor, and till this day we're still friendly, and
right.
and it's very interesting, and having people that know you for so long, it's very interesting, and it's great.
Yeah. So. Are you in touch with like A.Y. Murnick, or you're not really?
So A.Y. Murnick so I speak to him occasionally. He's actually he's also an attorney. Right. He was living out in LA. He actually now lives in Texas. Right. So I speak to him every once in a while. He's great, and there's a lot of other people that there's so many to name, but those are
it's too long.
Yeah, the names are too long, but again, it's all those people, I think, really gave their own unique blend, and their own twist on what it, or I would say they each kind of helped me in their own way realize, 100%. And I'm sure your counselors as well, and whatnot.
I just want to spill a little some news between me and you. So our last summer together, in I think it was 2008, and it was before Kids of Courage started. So we were color war generals together.
I remember that.
If you remember that,
they put us up against each other.
They put us up against each other, and unfortunately, I just found this out a couple years ago that they cheated, and your team, Team Blue, actually won. Team Red lost. You know why they did that? You know why they cheated and said Team Red won? Because they didn't want people to go into crisis. So,
you know what? I'll take the L just for that. I'll take the L, so no one has to go into crisis. But that is funny to hear that all those years later. That was a really fun time. I remember that
it was the craziest year, I think, in 2008.
Yep. That was really, really fun. That was that was a good time. I remember how they broke out color war. I remember it's funny because now I'm thinking back, and I can vividly remember us on the stage as they announced the winner. Both had our face painted, and it was crazy. But those are good times, and I'm sure they're having the best times even now.
I was just there a couple weeks ago for Bike for Chai,
Oh wow,
and yeah, it looked like it's definitely different today, and I'm
sure,
not gonna lie, but for the kids that are there now, it's the same like it was when we
for
were
sure.
there.
Yeah, and I think it's also, it's one of those things when you go back and, looking at your childhood, everything is different. And, we have those feelings, when we're kids looking through one lens, it's different than when we go back and looking through the adult lens.
Yeah.
And even when I was a staff member and, I was a counselor, or, head staff at Kids of Courage, it was all different. You know, these things change over time, but I think, one of just the important thing really at the end of the day is that the campers and the kids that are there, they love it no matter what, and I always say that really, whether it's Kids of Courage or Camp Simcha, you could just put all those people in a room and do absolutely nothing and everyone would still have a blast, right? Because at the end of the day,
100%.
it's really just about the people. It's about, the atmosphere, and that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And I will say, just as an aside, going back as a staff member, and unfortunately, I never got to go back as a staff member to Camp Simcha, and I actually haven't been to the camp since I guess 2008, which is pretty crazy. But I did have the experience.
Very different
I'm
now.
sure I know they've done construction.
Yeah.
I maybe next year we'll go back. But going as as a staff member on Kids of Courage, it was really inspiring because going from a camper to a counselor who's now giving to to some of them are children, but to the campers is really like a eye watering moment. At least it was for me, and especially when a lot of the campers are people that I've known since you and I met, right?
Right.
Since all the way
100%.
back then, and it's really just cool to kind of see how everyone's grown up and doing their own thing, and even people that are still going on these, either Kids of Courage or High Lifeline, you know, a lot of them have a lot of these friends have made a name for themselves, despite their disability and, are working and doing things like that. And I think, 10, 15, 20 years ago, people would have thought that that's like impossible, right? And, it wouldn't
You're
even be
100%
thought
right.
of.
You're
And I think
100%
it's
right.
really, yeah, and I think it's just changed a whole perspective on the disabled community. Thank God in the Jewish world, and I think slowly, hopefully that radiates outward towards the rest of the world also. Because at the end of the day, something that it's always tough to remember, but the disabled people are the largest minority in the world, right? We can talk about race, skin color, whatever it is, but
Right.
disabled people are the largest, and that covers a wide variety of disabilities. And I think it's just really important to remember that someone has a disability, whether they use a wheelchair or have a mental handicap or whatever it is, aren't that different, and maybe they just need a little bit of help on something or doing things a little bit differently. And I think we're just as capable. I think it's we hopefully the world gets to that place where there is really no difference.
Yeah. Very well said. Just one last message that you
Sure.
have for our listeners to just tell the world that you want to send.
Message. Let's see. I think. Well, first of all, I'll just say this. I appreciate you inviting me on, and giving me the platform, and I hope everyone tunes in, and because I've listened to um, your past shows, and I think they're great, and I like what you're doing, and so that's great, and I think really just the message is that people may look at it different from the outside and do things a little bit differently, but that really shouldn't have an impact on who they are and what they're capable of. You know, and I think we've all probably been there. You know, if you've had a disability, you've all had that experience where people treat you differently, and you know, I think it's time to just show that, hey, we're here to stay, and we can put in our you know, our work and do everything that you can, even if it's a little bit different. You know, and unfortunately, in these day and age, everyone's a little bit tense, and everyone's has different opinions, but we all just got to come together. So that's about it, you know?
Wow. Beautiful message.
Yeah. So
David, I just want to say thank you for letting me interview, and hopefully I've definitely gained a lot from this interview, and it was really a pleasure. First of all, to get back to knowing each other, that's really incredible. And what you give out to the world is something very special and unique, and just keep it up.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I think you know, same goes for you. You know, I think that you're, you know, I wish you know, you know, just doing what you are and like spreading people's messages. I think it's really cool. I think it's great for people to hear, you know, different things going on from different people and voices. And, you know, I appreciate being here, and keep up the good work. And let's, you know, we, like you said, when we started this, I don't think you and I have been in the same room in like 10, 15 years at the minimum. So here we're in a virtual room, but hopefully soon we'll be in a physical room together.
100%. Yeah, let's make that happen. Anyway,
Absolutely.
Thank you, David. Have a great day, and
Thank you.
enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wow, what an amazing episode it was. The amount of information that David shared, wow, just wow. That is unbelievable. What he goes through on a day-to-day basis with his skin disease, his trials and tribulations, and where he ended up today as a lawyer is very unbelievable. Wow. I just want to say thank you to David for letting me interview him. And I also want to give our shout out to our sponsors yet again, VentureTech Computers. For all your computer repair needs, whether it be IT support, computer repair, server management, etc., VentureTech Computer Repair is there for you. Please visit us at www.venturetechcomputers.com. Shoot us an email at info@venturetechcomputers.com, or call us at 347-603-0033. 347-603-0033, as well as the Muncie Mavasser for sponsoring this week's episode. To learn more about the Muncie Mavasser, please visit them at www.munciemavasser.com. That is www.munciemavasser.com. Thanks for watching, and please like, comment, subscribe, and share this week's episode. And in the comments, please say the word unbelievable. Type the word unbelievable for this week's episode. Until next time, this is Yehuda Blonder from the Unique Perspective Show.